Welcome back to the 2025 ACSA Leadership Assembly, brought to you by our friends at Family Leadership Incorporated. We've talked a lot about immigration and some of the challenges out there for our students, for our families, for our educators. And we wanted to bring together a panel of experts in the field to talk about how we can navigate some of those immigration challenges. So let's welcome our three guests. Dr. Adam Clark is the superintendent from Mount Diablo Unified School District that is in the Bay Area. Sloan Simmons is a partner at Lozano Smith, attorneys at law based in the Sacramento office. And Stephanie Graves is CEO of the Lee Andrews Group. That is a public relations firm in the Los Angeles area, one of our ACSA partners. To all three of you, welcome to the ACSA Leadership Assembly. Dr. Clark, let me start with you. You were featured in a New York Times article in early January as your school began preparing for ICE agents to begin arrests of undocumented immigrants. Can you talk a little bit about how your district was preparing for this and how things have evolved?
Yeah, so again, thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to talk about this very important topic. So some of the things that we started early on was just reviewing our board policies, making sure that within our policies that we had very clear guidelines and protocols for individuals who had access to our school site. So that's really where we started, was making sure that our policies were up to date, and then sharing those policies with all of our administrators and making sure that their office managers and school personnel knew what the expectations were if anyone was to come to our school sites. And then following up with that, we began having small meetings with parent groups and with students, and again, just reassuring them that that we weren't just going to allow anyone to show up to our schools and things like that. And so that was kind of on the ground floor of things that we started to do to prepare for the anxiety and for the the daily news stories about this very unfortunate topic. And then lastly, I met with our local law enforcement to make sure that we were on the same page and that I knew what their practices and policies and procedures were pertaining to assisting ICE agents or doing things on their own, which they don't do either. So that was very comforting to know, and I shared that with our school community.
And I want to let all of our viewers know that if you have questions for Dr. Clark, for Sloan, or for Stephanie, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and get to some of those a little bit later on in the panel discussion. Sloan, as we moved closer to the transfer of power in Washington, D.C. and the threat of ICE arrests, what questions were you receiving from our school districts?
Yeah, thank you, Naj. Honor to be here this morning. I think in answering that, I'd put some context on this, in that obviously throughout the election cycle, the tenor on this issue allowed those in school official roles, as well as us that do legal work of schools, to start to, in large part, predict where we were going. And then if you turn back the clock even farther, 2017, 2018, we did a dry run on this. This is a more robust, I think, version of federal immigration enforcement that we saw in the initial first Trump administration. So I think leading into the inauguration in January, in some ways, we kind of knew what the playbook would be, both from a federal angle as well as what that response would be from the state, especially in light of all the work that California put into this the last go around of Ed Code 234.7 and the Attorney General's guidance. But I also think what was at play is, between then and now, we have new superintendents, new school site leaders, new board members, all of whom this felt very new. And so part of the questions, all the questions that were being asked, the educating to kind of bring everybody back up to speed, was to remind folks that we've been through this once. We're well situated as a state and for school districts to respond to this because of the resulting model policies that came out at the time in 2017, 2018, which is 5145.13 for most districts. But the questions, I think, they all fall under the larger umbrella, Naj, of what do we do, what can we do, what should we do? And that's from, do we need to adopt a policy for those folks that perhaps didn't recall that they had one in place because they were required to put one in place? reminding folks of the guidance issued by the Attorney General on this issue pursuant to the Ed Code. And I would say kudos to the Attorney General's office in this respect, because it's not unusual for legislation to direct the state agency to put out certain levels of guidance. And the degree of guidance and specificity and detail that has come out from the Attorney General's office on this issue in particular is a model for what you'd like to see when you're an agency tasked with giving that guidance. But those questions range from, how do we respond if we've got, ICE at the front door? What do we ask? How do we measure exigent circumstances? What do we do if a warrant, a court order, a subpoena? What can we tell parents? What can we advise families on without crossing the line between being educators and immigration law attorneys? 2, can we notify our neighborhood and our community if ICE shows up on campus? Do we contact parents if ICE comes to the front door? And so I think that whole umbrella just raises the specter, and I know we're going to get to it, but the rescission of the concept of a sensitive location really raised the stakes on those questions.
Stephanie, you heard Dr. Clark talk about how his school community was preparing, and those of us in communications, in marketing, in public relations, planning is key to delivering the right message. But how do you go about planning, messaging, actions when there's fear involved in the storyline itself?
Oh, sure, Naj. And good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here. But yes, when fear is involved, planning must really start with empathy and clarity. So here's an approach. You listen first. You begin by genuinely understanding the concerns of your community. You hold listening sessions with parents, teachers, and staff, and really validate their emotions and acknowledge the uncertainty they feel. So in times of crisis, trust is built on being heard first, and then just craft a clear and consistent message. Develop key messages that clearly outline what the school is doing to ensure the student safety and support, what you know about the situation and what remains uncertain. And then every communication, be it in an email, a social media post, or a press conference, should echo these same reassuring facts. But always just emphasize that the school's primary focus is the well-being and education of every student, and that this commitment guides every decision regardless of external pressures.
Yeah, and Stephanie, I really like that first message that you gave about trust is built on being heard first. It's so important. So let's talk about the importance of storytelling, because if you're not telling your story, then somebody else is telling your story. We have seen undocumented students and adults, the LGBTQ community, under the microscope. And now we have the threat of federal funding being pulled away, which is especially impactful for our rural communities. How should school districts, how should our community stakeholders go about identifying the stories to tell?
Yeah, so in today's climate, your messaging must be principled and pragmatic. So the goal isn't to engage in politics, but really protect the integrity of your educational mission while underscoring that a commitment is to all students is a core strength of your community. So a framework is, emphasize the universal right to education, position that your schools as institutions that provide every child with the opportunity to succeed, and just make that clear. Your focus is on delivering quality education, and then highlight diversity as a strength. Showcase how the rich diversity of your student body really enhances a learning environment, and emphasize that diversity drives creativity, resilience, and prepares students for a globalized future.
Sloan, let me ask you, we had the executive order rescinding the restrictions on ICE agents being able to enter these so-called sensitive areas, which include schools. What are you hearing about ICE agents entering schools and the rights of school leaders in keeping the agents off campus? Because we are hearing anecdotal stories about hundreds of students sometimes not showing up when they find out that ICE agents are at the supermarket, which is maybe a mile away from the school. What about the rights of the schools, the school leaders, the school districts?
Yeah, I mean, I'd start with an initial kind of interesting nuance with this. That while there's been a ton of executive orders coming out, the way in which the sensitive locations or protected areas memorandum that had long been in existence, both an iteration going back to 2011 and then an updated version that came out at a later date. The way it's been rescinded is a statement from the DHS secretary. You can find a webpage at the DHS website that says it's been rescinded, but there hasn't been any formal document that at least we've been able to track down, and we've been searching that kind of lays this out. And so I say that it, not that it has any less of effect. I think we have to go by what that statement said in terms of rescission of the sensitive locations policy that's been longstanding. But I also think part of the tactic going to the anecdote you raised about, ICE agents in town, students not showing up to school. I think part of the tactic in enforcement is to instill fear by indicating that the sensitive locations policy has been rescinded, perhaps with some concept of intended, forced self-deportation because of the fear being instilled there. Because the facts on the ground are that to this day, we represent districts up and down the state and are obviously measuring news sources at all times. I'm unaware, and my team's unaware at this point, if there's actually been any direct ICE engagement with school staff on a campus so far since the rescission of the sensitive locations policy was issued by, statement by the DHS secretary. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And Stephanie may know more about this, but I think some of the rumors on the ground is that there will be a focus in the Los Angeles area in the coming weeks on immigration enforcement. And that might be a litmus test as to how far they're going to take their approach on sensitive locations when they, in fact, institute those efforts. In terms of the barriers and standards for school officials when there is a request to access campus. And I'll take that to be whether it's to arrest, to interview, to request student records. As AG Bonta pointed out, California law has a very clear structure in terms of the rights of our students and their families that fall into this category. Between those laws and FERPA, which applies no matter what in terms of federal immigration enforcement, those two bodies of law are our guidepost as to what we can and can't do. The general rule, and I would, as I said earlier, I think the AG's guidance on this, and there's multiple documents that have been put out. I would refer to the quick reference guide for officials, as well as the Know Your Educational Rights document. But I think it's a good idea for districts to remain in the lanes with that AG guidance, because it's in essence completely consistent with California law and provides school districts with some cover as to what they're doing, because they're saying, well, we are following what the Attorney General has directed and what state law is. In terms of access, exigent circumstances are always going to be one where we may have to permit access. If they can describe adequately the exigent circumstances, there's someone with a gun, for example, on campus, that's when we're probably going to clear the way. Apart from that, we're looking for federal court orders, whether it's a warrant or a court order. And even in those instances, we're going to make sure that we've documented it. Staff is free to video and make copies of what's been requested if ICE will comply with that. And then once we move away from those, we're in classic FERPA land. We're not just going to turn over student records and information based on a request from an officer. They've got to go through those processes. And that includes if it is an administrative issued warrant or subpoena, that is not per se something which the district staff or school site staff have to respond to immediately. So they should be engaging their leadership, which will likely then engage legal counsel. But those are kind of the big picture ideas. Exigent circumstances may be an exception, and the AG has given guidance to not physically obstruct access, but there is only a narrow lane in which there is an entitlement legally to access an individual or records. And short of that, we're just going to comply with California law and the Attorney General's guidance and FERPA when it comes to that.
Dr. Clark, you and I have known each other for several years, not just in your current position in Mount Diablo, but also back to when you were at Vallejo Unified. Every place you've been really part of the fabric of the community. Where is your district right now with respect to the challenging times, especially because things are so fluid? You never know what's going to happen today or tomorrow because things are so fluid. So tell me about what's the tenor in your community?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate to serve in an extremely diverse community, and I know that the political landscape goes on both ends in our district. And so, what I try to do instead of leaning one way or another, I really try to focus on serving all students, and we do that by constantly communicating with our communities and putting out weekly communications and highlighting what students are doing and sort of the positive stories around our district. I'm a firm believer if you don't tell your story, someone else will. And so we tell our story, and it's always been centered on what's best for students. Now, unfortunately, over the last several weeks, there's been so many rumors, national media coming out about things, and so I have had to more than I like to. I have had to put out notices, just again bringing us back to our core values and just our foundational value within our LCAP is all students will receive a high quality education in a safe and welcoming environment. Continued on, and so just leaning on those words and those practices have really brought comfort to many in our community, whether it's our LGBTQ community or whether our immigrant community, which we have an extremely large immigrant community, or if we have individuals in our community who want to make sure that we are following laws and an education code. I want to assure folks that we are going to do everything within the law to serve our students at the highest level. And so sometimes that leaves some people feeling uneasy and it leaves some people feeling assured. But at every point, I'm going to make sure that the school district is at the center of the community and it's seen in a positive light. And we have to be very intentional in that work. One thing I did want to hold up is we have an organization here in Contra Costa County, Stand Together Contra Costa County, and we are going to be hosting a forum for families to come and to get legal advice from immigration attorneys at no cost to the district, but we are hosting it. But really, just so that we can get facts out there. So much is brought forward with rumors or social media and things like that. We really want to live in a world of facts and what's real and what is currently in our close reality. And I have found if you lead in that way, that you can connect with your communities, whether it's Vallejo, Concord, Bay Point, Walnut Creek, any of the wonderful communities that I've been fortunate enough to serve in.
Stephanie, let me ask you a follow-up question based on something that Sloan said in his last response, which was we now anticipate a focus in Los Angeles and the Los Angeles area where you and your firm are located on immigration enforcement. So this is going to force public relations experts, communications managers to have to pivot very quickly, perhaps into crisis management mode. I asked you earlier about planning and how important it is. But when you have to move into crisis management mode, what is that like for a communicator, for a public relations firm? Because you have to do it so quickly.
Right. No. And yes, thank you. And also, I want to say, Dr. Clark, I understand why you have him on because he's doing everything correctly, what he should be doing. But so storytelling is just a very strategic tool that serves multiple audiences. So yes, it was leaked to the LA Times that there's going to be mass immigration raids later this month, but in LA. But storytelling is not solely for the press. It's equally for your students, parents, and community stakeholders, and even policymakers. So crisis, first define your audiences, have that ready. Press and external media, students and parents, community and policymakers, and then really identify your core themes and narratives. that resilience in adversity, inclusion and diversity, community support. And then these themes become the backbone of your narrative and your crisis comms, your response, your storytelling. And so then really just amplify it with your authentic voices. The most powerful stories are those told by the people who live them. So empower students, teachers, parents, community leaders to share their experiences. And then, always invest in your multi-channel storytelling platforms so that you can reach everyone effectively.
Dr. Clark, I mentioned this a little bit earlier in this panel discussion, that we hear some students aren't coming to school because of the fear of ICE agents. And when they aren't in school, we have consequences that come from that beyond learning loss. These students aren't getting their meals. These students aren't able to participate in sports or band or theater. These students aren't getting the engagement that they so desperately need from teachers, from their fellow students. What's your message to them as we close out about the importance of getting to school?
Yeah, well, it's a very easy message, because that's the message that we tell 180 days within the school year, is that you have to show up. And so something that we are doing currently right now, we're watching our attendance daily, and we are seeing if there are patterns where students aren't coming to school, so that we can apply some resources or some additional communications. Fortunately, at least at this time, our attendance patterns are pretty much even, and there aren't any outliers. But that's an important thing, is making sure that students are showing up. We have had a few student walkouts. And in those cases, I've instructed our administrators to allow the walkouts and to just ensure that the students are safe, but to let them voice their concerns. And then that I believe, has contributed to our students showing up at school every day, because they're able to speak their minds, they're able to express their fears and anxieties, and then they're also able to see for themselves that it is a safe and welcoming environment. But no matter what, whether we're in these challenging times or whether we're in times in the future or in the past, students have to show up each and every day. Otherwise, all the services and resources that we have can't reach them. So we're going to continue to push for coming to school each and every day.
All right. Dr. Adam Clark, Superintendent, Mount Diablo Unified School District. Sloan Simmons is a partner with Lozano Smith, Attorneys of Law, and Stephanie Graves, CEO of the Lee Andrews Group in Los Angeles. Adam, Sloan, Stephanie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Folks, I do want to tell you just a little bit about our crisis public relations support with the Lee Andrews Group. If you go onto our website, at ACSA.org, go to the Member Services and Benefits section, you will learn more about the crisis support program that we have with the Lee Andrews Group. You'll get an hour of free consultation with their team at the Lee Andrews Group. This can be crisis support. This could be media relations. This could be just building your brand. They will help you out and give you that hour of support. And then after that, you can work with them. This is for school districts. This is for you just as a school administrator. Again, go to ACSA.org, go to our Member Services and Benefits section for more information on that.